graph that you can see here summarizes what we have seen in the previous two videos about negative and positive consumption externalities. So you see here in the middle, the private marginal benefit curve, which is basically the demand curve from the perspective of any particular consumer. And we would obviously get an optimal choice, an optimal quantity somewhere here here at this point. Now, if we have a positive externality, we would have the case where the social marginal benefit is greater than the private marginal benefit. Think again about the example of face masks during the COVID pandemic, which has a fairly small private benefit, but a huge social benefit, or vaccine being a similar example. Whereas there are obviously also negative externalities in consumption, whereby the socially optimal amount is smaller than the privately optimal. That was the example of smoking. So you can see here again, in that case, people consume too much because their private marginal benefits are higher than the social ones. In case of a positive externality, people actually consume too little. Now, here is another example just of a negative externality, which is certainly a challenge for governments in many countries, which are SUVs. So these are cars that also in Ireland are very, very popular. But there are significant externalities to them, right? So the amount of gas they use for when you drive them, but they also have a negative externality regarding the wear and tear of roads because they're quite heavy. They take up huge spaces in parking lots, and there is also studies showing that there is actually a lot more fatal accidents with SUVs than with other types of cars driven also by regular private people. And so that is obviously an example. We all like driving these cars because they're nice to drive, they're comfortable, they're big, and so on. But again, because we are not internalizing or only partially internalizing the negative externality, we actually consume too much of it. So to sum up, when it comes to consumption externalities, so the market solution we're getting, if we just let every consumer decide what's best for them, is actually inefficient. It's inefficient because of this over or under consumption. People either consume too much and impose a negative externalities on others, or if they impose a positive externality, they consume actually too little. So that usually requires government intervention. Either, as we've seen during the COVID pandemic, by, for example, making it mandatory to wear face masks to reap that positive externality, or by subsidizing people who exert or activities that have a positive externality, or by taxing or in other ways punishing activities that exert a negative externality. But what I would like to emphasize once again is that in very rare cases is the optimal solution to have no production or consumption at all. Because production brings profit both for the firm, but also economically for society, and the same goes for consumption. So unless we want to live an absolutely primitive life, we have to produce, and production comes with emissions. The question is just how can we get producers to either produce not as much or produce the same amount as they produce at the moment with lower emissions? How can we incentivize them? And in environmental economics, also in microtheory, in contract theory, there's lots of economists working on exactly those questions, for which the answers are by no means trivial.